Hi, Simon. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. And thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat about the show today. You must be glad to get this thing out here already.
Yeah, likewise for taking the time to talk about it. Yes, I'm very happy to finally have it released this Friday. It's a long process making the show, so this is the best part. This is the fun part. A little trepidatious because you're never sure how it's going to be received, but this is the fun part. Is the work is done. Now it's just the release.
Oh, well, I know I had great fun with it. And particularly the fact that obviously each episode has its own very distinct animation style. So, despite that, though, it obviously still feels very authentic to the boys and what we've come to know of the obviously the live action show. So, what would you say was the biggest challenge with making sure that was the case?
Well, here's the thing. We had Eric Kripke, obviously the showrunner, the creator of The Boys. He was involved with Diabolical the entire step of the way. So he made sure that we just stayed in the world of The Boys. I mean, the big thing we took from him was we wanted to be true to uh, things that were true in the main show. So Compound V had to work like Compound V. Superheroes are all made in the world of The Boys. They all come from Compound V. They're not just like, a random industrial accident, or they're not born that way, or they're not magic like they are in some of the others. So we had to be true to that. Vought had to act like Vought does. So as long as we had those guidelines in place and we weren't like actively contradicting the main show, and obviously like Homelander had to act like Homelander, the Deep had to act like the Deep. As long as we did that, the rest of it was wide open. So we had almost complete freedom in every other way. So it was just be true to the spirit and the tenor of the main show. Otherwise, go have fun. And that's, those are great words. It's like those are the kind of constraints you want. Because if we didn't have those, then why are we connected to The Boys at all? So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And talking of that animation, obviously, I think people will be familiar with the obviously the animation styles and what they're inspired by. But are you guys ever worried with something like that first episode that you're going to be getting a call from Warner Brothers saying, "Look, you can't be using this animation style for a baby blowing through all these people," or is it just a case of having fun and just paying homage to that?
I mean, there's a lot of influences. Like Warner Brothers doesn't own an animation style. Nobody owns that specific style of animation. That'd be like saying like someone owns Cubism, or like modern art. Um, it was an homage, but not just to like Looney Tunes. Obviously, there was like Roger Rabbit. Disney was doing shows. There were a lot of like independent Fleischer cartoons and things like that that all were of that era. So it's more of a love letter to that era, that kind of handmade cartoon, back then. And part of that love letter from us was trying to be as authentic as possible. So we found two great directors who specialize, like Crystal and Derek Thompson, specialize in that style of animation. Our composers for that episode were Steve and Julie Bernstein, who composed for the Animaniacs and Tom and Jerry and a lot of those shows, and do that style of orchestration. And we recorded a 29-piece orchestra for that episode to try and be as authentic as possible. So 100% it's a love letter to that style. It's us being like, if we're going to do this style, the kind of style that we grew up watching, a lot of us, let's do it as hard as we can. Let's try and get as close to that as we can given our budget and our schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the episode you get to write, the finale, I suppose you could say, obviously does get to delve into Homelander and maybe a little bit of his origin story. So, how closely did you work with obviously someone like Eric Kripke for an episode like that to make sure you weren't contradicting what we've seen in the show and to obviously build on that for it maybe to be picked up on down the line somewhere?
Yeah, very closely. I mean, again, Eric was on every email. We talked very often all through the course of production. So even that script, like I pitched him that idea, like he wanted. So that was the last episode we wrote. We wanted to keep that slot empty. I knew I would fill that slot with something that I felt was missing from the show, because all the other episodes we went out to the writers. So as those started to fill up, we started to get a feel for the kind of stories we were getting, and thankfully we were getting a mix of very comedic, very serious, dramatic. And at the end, it felt like we wanted something else dramatic, something else, a little, not a comedic episode, but something a little darker. And with talking with Eric, Eric talked about how he would have loved to have seen an episode that had maybe like an early mission with Homelander and Noir together before the Seven came about. And that sort of lit a light bulb in my head. And we started talking about like, why don't we just write Homelander's first mission? And he was like, great. So I pitched him the rough idea for it. And then I went off and wrote it and trepidatiously gave him my script because of course I was a fan of The Boys before I started on this show. So I'm writing his characters and I'm writing an origin story for his character. I want to make sure I get that as right as I can. And he was gracious and wonderful to work with. And he gave me feedback and we workshopped the script and we got it to where it is. So he was 100% involved in the whole process, not just for my episode, but for all of them all along the way.
Yeah, and there are so many great characters to introduce throughout all these episodes. And I'm curious for you, obviously having served as an executive producer on the show, are you hopeful they might come back, whether it be in obviously another season of this show, or even maybe get translated into live action down the line, do you think?
I mean, that would be wonderful. I think, my hopes for a second season of the show is to do something all new, which is not to say we wouldn't continue a storyline, but let's say we were picking up a storyline from season one. Like if we were going to do another episode of Laser Baby, I would want to give you something you haven't seen. I don't want to just continue that story and give you another Looney Tunes style episode. I would want to say, like, maybe that's the episode we change and we do in live action in season 2. Maybe we give it to you in a completely different manner. Maybe we make it computer animated. Maybe we do it as a puppet show. I don't even know, but I want to make sure that Diabolical, if we get a second season, we don't repeat ourselves from season 1. I think that's the promise of this show, is it's a grab bag of creativity, but we don't repeat ourselves. We give you something new, and we don't do what the mothership does either. We're something different. That's the reason for our show to exist, to give you the stories that you're not getting from the mothership or any of the other spin-offs on this show. So.
Yeah, well, I'd say you did a fantastic job of that. And of course, another favorite episode of mine, and there's something I loved about all of them, to be honest, but of course, that Garth Ennis episode, which is very comic book inspired, and Simon Pegg obviously coming in that role. What was it like to work with him and obviously give him the chance to tell another story set in that world?
I mean, he was, I think the first writer we went out to was Garth, because obviously once we started talking about the series, we're like, well, we have to do Garth's version of The Boys, because obviously Eric, takes so much from Garth's books, but it's a different animal. There's a translation. It's changed somewhat. We wanted to do Garth's version animated, so we went to Garth very early on, and he was like, I mean, I'm again a huge fan. I've read all The Boys. I've read Preacher. I read him back when he wrote on Judge Dredd. I've been reading his work for years, so that was a treat for me. And he was just the nicest, best person to work with. He was like, "This sounds great. I would love to do it." He's like, "When do you need a script by?" And we're like, "Well, we've got some time." And like 4 days later, a script popped up in my inbox, already written and finished by him for the show, just like that. And it was great. And then we kept him involved through the whole process along. So he saw early designs, gave feedback on that. He was part of casting as we started to put the who we wanted to play, the different roles. He had input on that, input on the music. We kept him as involved as we could through the whole run of his episode. So and then bring Simon Pegg in. I mean, that wasn't even a decision. That was just logical. Like, who else would play Wee Huey? And my heart, the one thing I was like, what if he's too busy or if he can't do it? But thankfully, he was like, I will absolutely make time for this. And we sent a recording crew out to his house and recorded him in his house, because again, it was pandemic, and he was amazing, and we got it all, and I would do it again in a second.
Yeah, awesome. And of course, this series really does deal with some hard-hitting topics. And of course, another show you've worked on, which obviously blended that ultra violence with quite timely issues, was Invincible. So I've got to ask while I have you, is there anything you can tease about that season 2 and 3 that's been announced? Because I know a lot of people. You
can see all the books right there, all my collection along there. We're working hard on it. We've been working hard. I think the one tease I tell people is that we've been working hard on it for a longer period than I think people think. I think people maybe assume that we just got started on it, and that's not true. We've been working on it for a while now, but it's a big show, and to do it properly takes time. And we're still, in pandemic. We're hopefully coming out of it, so that makes everything a little slower too. But everybody is working very hard on it. I think you're going to be really happy with it, I hope. But we want to make it as badly as everybody wants to see it, so we are deep in work. Like, I wish it was done. I wish it was already finished, but it's not. We're deep into it. Literally this afternoon, that is what I'm doing, is doing more work on that show. Right after these interviews, I'm back onto Invincible. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you get back to work. Simon, thank you so much. Can't wait to see more of Invincible. Can't wait for people to see this show, because as I said, had so much fun with it. So thank you again for taking the time to have a chat today.
Yeah, likewise, Josh. Really nice to meet you. Thank you for taking the time to talk about the show.